The lights of the grand diamond ballroom were blinding, reflecting off the crystal chandeliers like 1,000 cold eyes. In the center of the room stood Kojo, a billionaire real estate mogul whose name was etched onto the skylines of the world. Beside him was Zari, a woman of quiet elegance and an expert landscape architect. Her beauty was soft, like a garden at dawn, but tonight she felt only the chill of the air conditioning against her skin. Kojo raised a glass of expensive champagne, silencing the room of elite investors. He smiled, but the warmth did not reach his eyes. "To a successful year of growth," Kojo bellowed, his voice booming through the speakers. "Unlike my portfolio, however, some things in my life refuse to produce a return on investment." He looked directly at Zari, the spotlight following his cruel gaze. 7 years and still no heir. It seems my wife's softness is just a sign of a failed, barren nature. Perhaps I should have invested in a sturdier model." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the crowd. Zari felt her heart shatter beneath her silk dress, the humiliation burning hotter than the stage lights, while Kojo grinned at his powerful friends. The journey to that night of public shame had been a slow, agonizing crawl through a polished prison. In the early days of their marriage, Zari's life was a kaleidoscope of vibrant colors and joyous laughter. She loved her work, designing green spaces that breathed life into the city's grey stone. But Kojo had a different vision for his wife. He began with her wardrobe, replacing her colorful dresses with slimming blacks and grays. He told her she was becoming too soft, a word he used like a weapon to attack her confidence. Slowly, he became a drill sergeant of her daily life. He monitored every meal she ate, documenting the calories like a debt collector. He scheduled her gym hours, watching from the doorway with a scowl if she slowed down for a moment. "A man of my stature needs a wife who looks like a trophy, not a liability," he would hiss. He convinced her that her lack of a child was a biological failure on her part. He used gaslighting to make her believe that her body was broken, keeping her isolated from friends who might have told her the truth about her own worth. Every morning, Zari stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirrors of their glass penthouse, searching for the flaws Kojo described so vividly. He told her that her curves were unsightly and that her face was losing its youthful edge. As she looked at her reflection, she saw a woman who looked tired and small, as if the very spirit was being drained out of her. However, the truth was something Kojo's lens of hate could not capture. Beneath the black clothes and the sadness, Zari's beauty was actually glowing with a hidden resilience. Her skin held the richness of fertile earth, and her eyes held the depth of the forest she loved to design. It was only the distorted reflection provided by Kojo's constant insults that made her feel like a withered branch. Kojo needed her to feel ugly so she would never realize she was too good for him. He needed her to believe she was barren so she would feel she owed him her loyalty despite his cruelty. He projected his own deep-seated insecurities onto her, turning their home into a hall of mirrors where only his voice was allowed to define what was real and what was beautiful. The final betrayal arrived on a cold Tuesday afternoon, smelling of expensive perfume and corporate ambition. Zari was in the library when Kojo entered with his personal assistant, Maya. Kojo had handpicked Maya months ago, often praising her perfect athletic physique in front of Zari to make her feel inadequate. Maya did not look at Zari with her usual professional distance. Instead, she wore a triumphant smirk. Without a word, Maya walked to the marble table and placed a black and white ultrasound image upon its cold surface. The room felt as though the oxygen had been sucked out of it. Kojo looked at the image, then back at Zari with a look of pure, icy disgust. "This is what a functional woman looks like, Zari," he said, his voice flat and final. "Maya is carrying my son. The legacy I've built needs a future, and you are clearly obsolete equipment. I've had my lawyers draft the papers.
You have 1 hour to pack whatever fits into a single suitcase. Maya folded her arms, watching Zari's world collapse. The gaslighting was over, replaced by a brutal reality that left Zari standing in the wreckage of a 7-year lie. The clock struck midnight as the heavy security doors of the penthouse slid shut behind Zari for the last time. Kojo had been thorough in his cruelty. He had cancelled her credit cards and frozen their joint accounts within minutes of his announcement. He didn't even allow her to take her jewelry, claiming it was corporate property, intended for a wife who could fulfill her duties. Rain began to pour as the security guards escorted her to the freight elevator, treating her like a trespasser in the home she had helped decorate. As she stood on the sidewalk with her lone suitcase, her phone buzzed with news alerts. Kojo had already leaked a statement to the press. He told the high society reporters that Zari had struggled with severe mental instability due to her infertility, and that he was heartfully seeking a divorce to protect the future of his company. The public, who only knew the polished image Kojo presented, began to post sympathetic messages for the billionaire. No one saw the woman standing in the rain, stripped of her dignity and her resources, discarded like a broken tool by the man who had promised to cherish her forever. With nowhere else to go, Zari drove her old car, the only thing still in her name, towards the city's edge. She was heading to an estate she hadn't visited in years, a property left to her by her grandmother. Her grandmother had been a legendary figure in the old neighborhoods, known as an urban healer who could make flowers grow in the cracks of the sidewalk. As Zari pulled up to the iron gate, she saw that the estate was completely overgrown. Vines thick as snakes climbed the stone walls, and the trees had grown so large they seemed to be trying to eat the house itself. It was a wild, untamed forest in the middle of the structured city. To anyone else, it looked like a ruin, but to Zari, it felt like a sanctuary. The air here was different. It was thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient secrets. She let herself in with an old brass key, the silence of the woods wrapping around her like a protective cloak. Here, there were no mirrors to tell her she was flawed, and no billionaire to tell her she was obsolete. There was only the rustle of leaves. The first night in the house was spent in the basement, where Zari sought shelter from the drafty upper floors. While clearing away old boxes, she discovered a heavy, dust-covered laptop tucked inside a velvet-lined drawer. When she opened it, the screen flickered to life, asking for a password. She tried several dates before typing her own name, Zari. The system unlocked instantly. Inside was not just a collection of family photos, but a hidden digital archive her grandmother had spent years building. Her grandmother had been more than a healer. She had been a collector of truths. As Zari scrolled through the files, she found a folder labeled Kojo, Real Estate. Inside were medical files that her grandmother had intercepted through a network of old friends in the city's clinics. Zari's breath hitched as she opened a document from 8 years ago. It was a secret sterility report for Kojo. He had undergone a reckless experimental medical procedure for enhanced vitality and anti-aging before they met. The procedure had worked for his ego, but it had rendered him completely sterile. He had known the truth before he even proposed to her.
The archive revealed a darkness deeper than Zari had ever imagined. There were saved emails between Kojo and a team of high-priced doctors. He had paid them millions in hush money to keep his diagnosis out of his official records. In one chilling exchange, Kojo suggested that they let Zari believe the childlessness is her fault. He wrote that it would keep her humble and dependent, ensuring she would never leave him out of pity or a sense of duty. He had sat across from her at dinner for 7 years, watching her cry over negative tests, watching her blame her own body, all while knowing he was the reason for the silence in their home. He had used her pain as a leash to keep her under his control.
The gaslighting wasn't just a byproduct of his personality, it was a calculated corporate strategy to protect his public legacy as a virile and powerful man. Zari felt a cold, sharp anger begin to replace her sadness. She realized that every insult about her softness and her barren nature had been a lie designed to bury his own secret shame. As the sun rose over the wild woods of the estate, Zari found an old audio player on the desk. She pressed play, and the warm, raspy voice of her late grandmother filled the room. "The city builds with steel, Zari, but life builds with soul," the recording said, as if the old woman were standing right there. Men like Kojo believe they can engineer the world to fit their ego, but a foundation built on lies will always crumble when the earth decides to speak. You have been told you are empty, but you are a garden waiting for the right season. The voice grew solemn. "Go to the velvet box in the safe, my child. Inside is a bioseed, a living technology from the old ways. It is a life sink. It reacts to the truth of the one who plants it. Plant the seed in the center of the rot, where the shadows are deepest. Let the earth judge between the weaver and the destroyer." Zari felt a strange humming in the air, a vibration that seemed to come from the trees themselves. She found the small velvet box and opened it to reveal a glowing metallic seed. The bioseed was unlike anything Zari had ever seen in her years of landscape architecture. It was heavy, pulsing with a soft amber light, and its surface felt like warm skin. It was living technology, a bridge between the ancient magic of the soil and the digital potential of the future. Zari carried the seed to the center of the estate's dying garden, a patch of land where the soil had turned sour and gray. She knelt in the dirt, her hands unmanicured and strong. As she dug into the earth, she felt a connection she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't designing a space for a wealthy client, she was planting her own survival. "This is for the 7 years of silence," she whispered, placing the seed into the ground. "This is for the truth." As she covered the seed with soil, a bolt of energy surged through her arms, making her hair stand on end. In that same moment, miles away in the heart of the city, the lights in the Kojo real estate headquarters flickered and died for the first time in 10 years. The life sink had begun, connecting the blooming garden to the crumbling empire. The transformation began almost immediately. Within an hour of planting the seed, a vibrant green sprout broke through the gray soil, growing at an impossible speed. Zari felt a rush of vitality return to her limbs. The exhaustion that had weighed her down for years vanished, replaced by a fierce, glowing energy. She looked at her hands and saw they were no longer trembling. In the city, the rot began to manifest in a different way. Kojo was in the middle of a board meeting boasting about his new son when the massive digital displays in the room began to glitch. Lines of code turned into images of withered vines, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Kojo felt a sudden sharp pain in his chest, a feeling of structural failure deep within his bones. He tried to speak, but his voice sounded like dry paper rubbing together. He dismissed the board, ignoring the way the lights continued to pulse with an eerie rhythmic heartbeat that seemed to be coming from the earth itself. By the end of the week, the withered CEO had become the talk of the city's underground gossip circles. Kojo had woken up to find his hair thinning in great clumps and his skin turning a sickly shade of gray parchment. No amount of expensive creams or vitality treatment could stop the decay. He visited the best specialists in the country, but they were baffled. "It's as if your cells are simply choosing to deconstruct," one doctor told him, trembling. Kojo's physical body was reflecting the structural rot of his soul. His movements became slow and painful, and he was forced to use a cane made of cold steel. He became paranoid, accusing his staff of poisoning him, but the truth was much simpler. The bioseed was sinking his health to the reality of his actions. As Zari's estate grew more vibrant, Kojo's existence grew more fragile. He sat in his glass penthouse, looking out into the city he thought he owned, while his body began to fail him like a building with a rotten foundation. The man who mocked his wife's softness was now becoming a ghost of his own vanity.
The corporate empire of Kojo Real Estate suffered a devastating blow on a Friday morning when the market crashed. It wasn't a general economic downturn, but a targeted collapse of Kojo-specific assets. In a shocking twist, Maya's perfect pregnancy was revealed to be a total fabrication. A private investigator hired by the board discovered that Maya had used a fake ultrasound and a prosthetic belly to secure a multi-million-dollar legacy settlement from Kojo. When the truth came out, Maya had already vanished, having siphoned millions of Kojo's liquid cash into untraceable offshore accounts. The news hit the headlines like a sledgehammer. The public, who had pitied Kojo, now mocked him for being played by his own assistant. The functional woman he had replaced Zari with was nothing more than a high-stakes con artist. Kojo's reputation as a brilliant judge of character and an invincible mogul shattered. His investors began to pull out, sensing that the man at the top was no longer a visionary, but a crumbling relic. He was left alone in his silent penthouse, surrounded by marble and glass that now felt like a tomb. At the estate, the bioseed had created a living house. The vines had woven themselves into the stone, creating a structure that was both a building and a breathing organism. Flowers that glowed in the dark lit the hallways, and the air was always the perfect temperature filtered by the leaves. Zari lived in the center of this miracle, her presence commanding the growth. She was no longer the obsolete equipment Kojo had discarded. She was radiant, her skin glowing with a light that seemed to come from within. She felt a miraculous weight in her womb, a pregnancy that had happened without a man, birthed from the very energy of the bioseed and her grandmother's legacy. She was carrying the future of the land itself. She spent her days talking to the plants, her voice a melody that governed the garden. She was the architect of a new world, one where life was not managed but celebrated. She knew that Kojo's empire was falling, and she felt no joy in it, only a deep sense of poetic balance. The silence of her previous life was gone, replaced by the humming heart of the woods. The birth of the Sun children was a cinematic event that lit up the night sky for miles. Zari did not go to a hospital. She gave birth in the center of the garden, surrounded by the glowing bio tree. She birthed 4 children, miracles of light and earth. They were not normal infants. From the moment they were born, they held elemental connections to the world around them. One could calm a storm with a whisper. Another could make a withered plant bloom with a touch. The 3rd child could see the future in the ripples of a pond. And the 4th child, the most powerful, could hear the truth in any voice. They grew at an incredible rate, walking in days and speaking with the wisdom of the old ways. They were the architects of the new city Zari was building in her heart. They played in the living house, their laughter sounding like silver bells. Zari watched them, knowing they were the ultimate proof of her worth. She had been called barren by a man who was hollow, but now she was the mother of the elements themselves. While Zari's garden flourished, Kojo's skyscraper became a monument to decay. The building was officially condemned by the city council after engineers discovered inexplicable structural rot in the primary supports. Steel beams were turning to rust in hours, and the glass windows were cracking in patterns that looked like spider webs. Kojo was now losing his sight, his vision blurring until the world was nothing but grey shadows. He sat in his wheelchair in the middle of his empty, dusty office, the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls. He was a billionaire with no empire, and a man with no family. He had rumors from his few remaining servants about a healer in the woods who had birthed children of pure light.
Driven by a final desperate spark of his old ego, he became convinced that he could buy his way back to health. He believed that if he could find Zari and take the children's blood or their energy, his youth and his buildings would be restored. He was a predator, even in his final decay. Kojo ordered his last 2 loyal security guards to drive him to the coordinates of his grandmother's estate. The journey was agonizing. Every bump in the road felt like his bones were being ground into powder. He was covered in sores, and his designer clothes hung off his shriveled frame like rags on a scarecrow. As they approached the edge of the city, the modern GPS systems began to fail, spinning in circles. The air grew thick with a green mist that smelled of ozone and ancient pine. The guards wanted to turn back, terrified by the way the trees seemed to lean over the road, but Kojo screamed at them to keep going. He clutched a briefcase filled with the last of his untraceable diamonds, believing that even the spirits of the woods had a price. He didn't realize that he wasn't going to a clinic. He was going to a confrontation with the truth he had spent his life trying to bury. As the SUV reached the iron gates, the engine died, and the forest fell into a heavy, expectant silence. The guards pushed Kojo's wheelchair through the estate gates, but as they crossed the threshold, the high-tech speakers in his chair began to glitch. Suddenly, they began to play recordings of every insult he had ever directed at Zari. The air was filled with his own voice, echoing through the trees. "You are obsolete. You are barren. You are a failure." It was as if the estate had recorded the frequency of his hate and was now playing it back as a barrier. The trees seemed to lean in, their leaves rustling in a way that sounded like mocking laughter. The guards, overwhelmed by the supernatural atmosphere, abandoned the wheelchair and ran back toward the road, leaving Kojo alone in the mist. He tried to wheel himself forward, his shriveled hands clawing at the controls, but the roots of the trees rose up from the ground to block his path. Every time he tried to speak a command, the forest screamed his own words back at him. He was trapped in a forest of echoes, forced to listen to the reality of the man he truly was. Finally, Kojo reached the center of the garden where the golden bio tree stood. Zari was there, waiting for him. She was standing under a canopy of glowing fruit, looking like a goddess of the earth. She wore a dress made of living silk, and her skin was radiant with a beauty that was timeless. She looked down at the withered grey man in the wheelchair, her expression one of profound disappointment rather than hate. Kojo looked up at her, his failing eyes trying to find the soft, weak woman he had discarded. "Zari," he wheezed, his voice like a rattle, "you have clearly found some new technology. I'm here to make a deal. I'll give you everything that is left. Just give me the cure. Give me the children. They are my property by blood anyway." Even at the end of his life, Kojo could only see the world through the lens of ownership and investment. He didn't see the children as people. He saw them as assets to be exploited for his own survival. He reached out a trembling hand, trying to grab the hem of her dress. The 4 children stepped out from behind the golden tree. They did not use weapons, and they did not raise their voices. They simply stood in a semicircle around the wheelchair. The child who hears the truth looked at Kojo with eyes that saw through his grey skin and into his hollow heart. "You speak of property," the child said, and the sound of the voice made Kojo's designer suit turn into literal rags. "You speak of blood, yet your blood is nothing but salt and vinegar." The child who controls the earth stepped forward, and Kojo's expensive steel wheelchair began to melt, the metal flowing back into the ground like liquid. Kojo collapsed into the dirt, his shriveled body looking like a discarded husk against the vibrant green grass. The children were the physical manifestation of his judgment. They didn't need to hurt him. Their very existence was a contradiction to everything he believed about power. He was a man who built with steel and lies, and he was now standing in a kingdom built with soul and truth. He was irrelevant in the world he had tried to colonize with his ego.
The fourth child, the one who held the power of the digital exposure, walked to Kojo and placed a small, warm hand on his forehead. "The city needs to see the blueprint," the child whispered. Instantly, every phone, billboard, and television screen in the metropolis began to broadcast Kojo's secret medical files. The public saw the sterility report from 8 years ago. They saw the emails where he planned to gaslight Zari. They saw the footage of him mocking her at the gala. The lens of hate was reversed. The entire world saw that the billionaire mogul was a fraud who had blamed an innocent woman for his own choices. The high society donors and the investors watched in horror as the man they had admired was revealed to be a psychological predator. Kojo's public legacy vanished in seconds, replaced by a permanent digital record of his cruelty. He tried to cover his face, but he had no strength left. He was being unmasked by the very technology he had used to build his polished prison. The truth was now the only currency left in the city. As the broadcast ended, the physical reversal reached its peak. In the city, the remaining Kojo towers literally crumbled into dust, their foundations having been synced to the reality of Kojo's lies. The glass shattered and the steel turned to rust, leaving only empty lots where the monuments to his ego had stood. Kojo felt the last of his wealth and his power evaporate into the air. He was left with nothing but his own shriveled ego, lying in the dirt of a garden he could not understand. The public saw him for exactly what he was, a hollow man who had tried to fill his emptiness by destroying the woman who loved him. He looked at Zari, his eyes pleading for a mercy he had never shown her. He realized that the softness he had mocked was the only thing that could have saved him, but he had spent 7 years trying to harden it into stone. He was the architect of his own ruin, and the building was finally falling. The silence of the garden was now his only audience. Zari stepped forward, the glowing fruit of the golden tree in her hand. This was her final act as the weaver. "I have the power to heal you, Kojo," she said, her voice like a cool breeze. "This is the fruit of memory. If you eat it and feel even a single spark of true remorse for what you did to me and to this land, you will be restored. You will not be a billionaire, but you will be a man again." She held the fruit to his lips. Kojo looked at the glowing fruit, then at Zari's radiant face. For a moment, it seemed he might choose the truth, but as he tasted the fruit, the memory of his lost towers and his stolen billions flooded his mind. His pride flared up one last time, a poisonous flame in the dark. He bit the fruit and spat it out into the dirt, cursing Zari and the children. "I don't want your mercy," he shrieked. "I want my empire back." He would rather die as a king of ashes than live as a humble man. He had spent too long building a foundation on lies to ever accept the soil of the truth. Because he refused to change, Kojo's physical body began to fade. He didn't die, he simply became a hollow echo. His form vanished from the garden, leaving behind only the smell of salt and old paper. He became a ghost in the machine, a permanent glitch in the city's security cameras and digital networks. People would sometimes see a grey, shriveled figure on the screens of the city's elevators or in the static of their televisions, a silent ghost forever watching the world but unable to touch it. He was a man who wanted to be seen by everyone, and now he was forced to be a witness to a world that had moved on without him. He was trapped in the very digital web he had used to monitor Zari, a prisoner of his own surveillance. He would spend eternity as a flicker in the lights, a reminder that power without a soul is just an empty signal.
The billionaire who wanted a legacy was now just a recurring error in the system, a hollow sound that carried no meaning. Zari's estate became the House of the Red Dust, the new center of the city. It was no longer a ruin, but a magnificent park and healing center where the unworthy and the broken came to be restored. The gardens she designed provided food and medicine for everyone, and the 4 children grew up to be the new architects of a city built on soul rather than steel. Zari lived a long, peaceful life, her beauty never fading because it was fed by the truth. She often stood at the edge of the garden, looking out at the city skyline, where the blue flowers now grew on the roofs of every building. She had learned that the body is not a trophy to be polished, but a vessel for the spirit. The story of the mogul and the weaver was told to every child in the new city as a lesson in the power of the heart. The final words were carved into the gate of the estate. A foundation built on lies will always fall to the truth. What lesson do you take from this story? Tell us in the comments below.